Good evening and Ramadan Kareem. Welcome to episode 2 of Learn Live UAE. Really excited to be with you this evening. We've got a great show lined up. I'm one of your hosts. My name's Olly Lewis, Assistant Head at British International School of Abu Dhabi.
Hi everybody, Ramadan Kareem. I'm Mark Anderson, ICT evangelist, and I'm really excited to be welcoming our various guests onto the show this evening. Something which should always be at the sort of forefront of our mind is having to keep our young people safe, and just as we would crossing the road or on a school trip, and equally when they're working in digital spaces, even more so, I guess, now with the thinking around online learning that's going on because of the issue around the world with the pandemic with coronavirus. So really looking forward to sharing tonight with Alan Mackenzie, Alan Cocker and Barry Lee Cummings. Really looking forward to hearing their points of view and their huge wealth of experience in this particular field. We've got a bunch of questions lined up as well. Please do sort of using the chat feature in YouTube as well. Bring questions across. We've already got a lovely comment already from Henry Platten, wishing us good luck for a great show. And we can share messages like this and questions on the screen like this during the show. It's super easy to do that. And obviously we'll better sort of respond to those comments and questions and sort of ask those to our guests and respond to them ourselves as well. So really looking forward to another fantastic show this evening. How's your week been, Ollie? How has it been since we last were on Learn Live UAE?
It's been really good, actually. Thank you. Really enjoyed our sort of discussions last week. Really got me thinking about how we can move forwards and adapt what we've been doing over the last sort of 7-8 weeks with our learners in the classroom to make the learning that is happening as efficient and effective as possible. So it was also great to hear from those guests to know that there are so many parallels between what we're doing at BISAD and the other schools in the region, although their context is different to ours. There was real parallels in uniformity in what we were doing in terms of our focus on the teachers and the students, seeing the humans and their well-being. So, it's been a great week. Lots of reflection as well since then. But I think I'm super excited about tonight, Mark, because again, it's a really current hot topic, and we've got 3 fantastic guests that I'm super excited to learn from. So I'm really looking forward to asking them some questions. How's your week been?
Yeah, really good. It's interesting. As you know, I do another show similar to this one called COVID Edu Stories with Bookie Youssef. And the focus of our show last week was looking at how FE colleges have been sort of working around online learning and the sort of things that schools, primary and secondary schools could learn from these FE colleges. And it was really lovely, actually, again, like you mentioned there, Ollie, was the parity of experiences and the similarity of sort of journeys that different schools are taking that we were having in our conversations last week happening in the colleges across the United Kingdom as well. So it's really good to see. I mean, to be fair, we see this sort of thing almost every day when we're sort of sharing for our professional learning networks on Twitter and LinkedIn, don't we?
Yeah. I mean, it's such a valuable resource. And, we mentioned in our promo video the importance of connecting and collaborating with people across the globe. And, one of your big mottos that have always sticks in my mind, and now more so than ever, is every day is a learning day. And everybody's a learning opportunity. I've always sort of thought that throughout my career, that no matter who the person and what stage in their career, we can always learn something from each other. I think that's really key. One of the things I love about teaching in the UAE actually is that there are so many talented teachers that always feel like whoever I meet, I can take something away from, which is great.
That sort of mirrors as well. We're sort of using Al here as an example as well. Al's a super experienced guest on our show last week as well. So it's really lovely to have you back joining us again this week as well, Al, watching in. But he's someone who's been in the edtech business and working with schools for a long time. But he still engages, sort of learns new things, and I learn new things every day through my connections using social media, my professional learning network. And so I'm also really keen to hear opinions and points of view from our guests this evening about how teachers can best actually put themselves out there when they're using social media for these sorts of practices as well.
Yeah, it should really be really rich conversation from these guys, I think.
Yeah, hopefully. So should we get our first guest in this evening, shall we, Ollie?
Yes, let's do that. Let's invite in Alan Cocker.
Hi, good evening, everybody.
Okay.
Good evening, Alan.
Thanks very much for having me on. It's a real pleasure to join you guys, so thanks for that.
Alan, you just sorry, Mark, go for it.
Great to see you again, Alan. So we saw you a few years ago when I came to the school and worked with you and things there. How are things going for you at the school at the moment?
Yeah, it's great actually, Mark. You know, I've been really proud of how teachers just continually innovate but don't lose what works. And it's been really interesting. One of the things I've been reflecting on over the last week, and something we're going to be doing with our middle leaders tomorrow, is what practice do we want to keep? We've developed some new practices and found some other ways of doing stuff over the last 8 weeks. And actually some of those things are far better than we were doing in the classroom. So it's kind of like, I don't want to lose some of that stuff, you know, but also we don't want to, you know, kind of live virtually forever. So I think one of the really interesting things coming out of the last sort of month or so is that people are able to step outside their comfort zones because they have to. And suddenly when they have to get their heads around how stuff works and how they make it safer and how they make it fit the context they're in. And then they create new stuff because they connect with one another and they share something, and then they connect again. And then you start getting stuff that just is very different, as well as some of the similar stuff you'd expect. And that's been really good. And that's been probably one of the greatest things I've seen come out of the last 8 weeks, really. So every cloud has its silver lining for sure.
Absolutely. For those people who don't know you, Alan, can you share a bit about who you are, your where you work now? You know, I know these things already, obviously, but you've got guests who don't know who you are.
Yeah, sure. It just feels like I'm in my front room having a chat with you guys. So yeah, basically, and that must be down to your skills as presenters. I think that the reality is that at the moment I'm a deputy head of primary at the British International School with Olly, who's in secondary. Prior to that, I was a head teacher for 12 plus years in the UK primary school, and my role was very much about developing other practice. So I had a lot of CPD work going on, supporting new heads, middle leaders, and so on and so forth. And I used to work with schools in difficulty as well. That was my previous life, if you like. Now I'm enjoying the international thing. Never worked internationally until this first post, and enjoying the differences and the contrast of that as well.
Mm. In the roles you've had, you know, obviously there's issues around curriculum and teaching and learning, all these sort of things, but often using, and I would say sort of using technology as a teaching and learning thing anyway, really. But when it comes to children engaging online and things, one of the questions we've got for you this evening, and I'll try and sort of remember it, although it won't be verbatim, but, you know, in a pastoral role, if you're a head of house or a head of year, and maybe also sort of think about the context of where we're at right now, sometimes you get to hear about things that are happening which are completely out of your control. You know, a child might have gone onto Snapchat and said something inappropriate about another pupil, or they might have put something that was out of context. I saw a really horrible series of private messages sent to the footballer Ian Wright today, for example, really racist comments sent to him privately on Instagram. And these sort of things still happen to adults as well as children. But have you got any advice for those sorts of activities when young people do get it wrong? And that's one of the great things about schools. You do have to get things wrong, but then work with teachers and other professionals to help get things right. What advice would you give to people about how to deal with those sorts of sensitive issues?
Yeah, I think the first thing for me is I'd ask the question first of all in terms of what are the consequences of doing nothing. You know, there's a tendency sometimes when it's not on your plot or on your watch to kind of say it's not my bag, it's not my thing. You know, those kids are at home, they're somewhere else, that's not me, it's nothing to do with me, sorry, can't help you. And I think that's something we as a profession have to be very careful and guarded against. So the first thing I would always ask is, you know, what are the consequences for a house leader or a year leader or form tutor or whatever, just to say, consequences of doing nothing. You know this, and now you know this, Pandora's box has been opened. You can't leave this, but I would never force someone into that situation. If I'd much rather they came to that realization. So the first thing is taking ownership and responsibility. If you know something that's not right, we have a moral obligation to address it and not to shy it off or pass it off. And it's too easy sometimes in this context to kind of do that, to kind of say, well, that's a parent's responsibility. It's not mine. I don't have anything to do with this. I have no control over this. But actually we do. And so that would be my first question. And then the other question I would fire back and sort of challenge practitioners about with that is, well, what would you do if it had happened at school? If someone was on a device in school and they'd said something unkind or racist or whatever, or if they had posted something that had meant to hurt or cause harm to somebody, what would you do then? And so the fact that we are in a different position actually doesn't negate our responsibility or part of the process, to be honest. It just makes the process slightly more challenging. And that then comes back down to the robustness of our own practice. How good are we at dealing with those conflict situations? How good are we communicating with those parents and with those students, and do what you would normally do? You'd normally ask the parents about it. You'd normally talk to the students about it. Well, we can still do those things. So my point about that would be to look very much to what is your practice in your school? What does your policy expect of you? What does your school ethos and culture expect of you to do? And you need to be true to that first and foremost. And if you're not sure about that, is it okay to contact a parent? Is it okay to contact a student? Then ask advice in your team about that. Those are things that senior teams are there to kind of overcome those problems and to make sure that they're aware of, yeah, actually, we do expect you to call the parent. Yes, we do expect you to conference about that, and it's okay to do that. But then you get down to practicalities of it. How much information can we get? But you should certainly find out what the issue is. You should certainly try to help make those students reflect on their behaviours, to try and put some kind of recompense in place to repair the situation, and to make them understand, that those mistakes can happen, but to understand the ramifications of that. When we're online, it's very easy to feel slightly safer, to be able to say things without any justification or any comeback. And but the audience is much wider, and not having someone come back at you in your face at that moment makes it easier to say something or to hurt somebody. So I think it goes back to that culture in school as well. What I hold in my mind, just like Ollie was saying about things like every day's a learning day, one thing I hold in mind about online behaviour, and someone said it a long time ago, is just don't put anything online you wouldn't want your granny to see. And and that's kind of how I would like the students I'm responsible for to try and live their lives by. We all make mistakes with it, but it's no different really than what you'd expect to do if someone said something in school or posted something in school that was unusual or unkind.
I agree with that. I mean, I'm really proud of, I've tweeted. The last time I looked, it was something like 100,000 tweets. I've written a lot on Twitter, but I'm really proud that for all the years I've been on there and the social medias, I haven't sworn once. And I've had that sort of that adage of don't say anything you wouldn't say to your head teacher or your gran or these people who impact on your lives, to not actually go and say those things. Don't get me wrong, if I stuck my foot in the lounge and it hurts, it might be a different kind of fish, but that's in the comfort of my own home when I've stuck my foot, That being kind and being mindful of your footprints and things is super important. Ollie, you wanted to jump in there?
Yeah, I was just going to sort of talk about that moral purpose, really, that, I think regardless of the incident and whether it's something online or in school, I think that really resonated with me, Alan, that, as practitioners, it is really our duty to follow up with things like that, because it's bigger and it involves more than just one person quite often. And actually, if you do leave it and you don't do something about that, that's a far worse situation to get yourself, not only as a practitioner, but as a school into, because it sends out the wrong message to your community, I think. And, like I sort of said last week in one of our shows, Mark, that, I struggle to think of anyone that doesn't really care about what they do. So I would be very surprised if there was a practitioner out there that did choose to turn a blind eye to something like that. But that's a really good, two really great questions, Alan, that you've asked there to, reflect on within our schools to make sure that we put our best foot forward as well as the students once we, mediate in that circumstance.
Yeah, I think it's so important, Ollie, that, we stand by what we believe. And sometimes that isn't easy. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. And, another phrase I would use to anybody in our practice is get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because the more you get used to that, the better practice you get of dealing with the things that are going to have to be dealt with. And, it's important that when somebody's, personal being, who they are, has been damaged because of somebody else's actions, that other person understands what they've done, that we help them to realize that they can take ownership over that, and they actually can do something to make it better as well and to improve it. They might not repair it totally, but they can certainly improve the situation. And I think that's about building those. It goes back to culture of your school and culture of how you work. Just because we're remote doesn't mean that you can't deal with these things. It goes back to the relationships we form and what we stand by. And we just have to reinforce those in our practice whilst we're remote. A look in the classroom and a smile at somebody walking down the corridor might help reinforce all of those right behaviours that you want to see, And we have to get used to kind of finding ways of reinforcing those behaviours to prevent those situations whilst we're working in a different context. And that's in the language we use, that's in praising and reinforcing what we do. And then it is about tackling it when it goes wrong. It's not, it's making sure we do that. And in a fair way. That person may not have meant to have caused the level of harm that they did. They may just have snapped back at something else that we're not aware of. But it still doesn't make it right. So I do think it's very important that we follow through with that, and that the two parties understand their roles in how they got to where they were and how they can go forward going on with that. But I think there's a bigger picture with sort of cyber world, and that is that it's too easy to cause massive damage. And you have an audience of 1, 2, 3 in a corner of a classroom or in a playground. But online, the audience is huge, and it can be multiplied very quickly. And so it's important, that everyone understands their role in that. And that goes back to how we talk to our parents, how we communicate, how we educate our students about the footprint they leave, about the values that we hold, and about the way that we use tools online effectively and kindly and for good.
I agree with what Ollie said about the moral stuff. There's some really key words, I think, Alan, that are coming from the things you're sharing. Ollie picked up on a few of them there with morals and what have you, but you're talking about it too. And it's key words like culture and ethos and duty and consistency and all the, and actually that goes right back to the core of the values, not only within the school that you work, but actually something just sort of common between most schools, about how we should actually behave and in life. We see that massively within the culture within the United Arab Emirates as well, don't we?
Yeah, definitely. And that's in UAE. It's taken very seriously. If any defamation, is a serious issue. And and whilst some of our children may be under the age of criminality, it's important they understand that, and our parents understand that as well. The ramifications could be much more serious than they may be in the UK. Could lead to criminal records, deportation, all sorts of things, just because you said something in a way you didn't really understand how bad it was going to be. So I do agree with that, and I think that culture is hard to reinforce when you're outside of the classroom, and you have to work at that in another way. And it's important that communication reinforces that on a regular basis. Just little things. I was just watching a lovely thing online, watching a lesson today in year 1 and 2, and the turn taking that was taking place. The kids were excited to do the activity, and they were all babbling away on Teams at the same time. 24 kids, and then it just was held in, no, that's not how we work, is it? And the kids just stopped straight away, and they were bang, and they were in it, they were listening to each other, they were feeding off each other. And it's just that constant reinforcement of what do we do, how do we treat each other, that helps prevent those things. And it also means that when you have an issue like that, kids take it seriously. They know that you mean something when you have to hold them to account, or when you have to speak to their parent about something. They're like, oh yeah, this is a different level now. And so then the likelihood of it sticking with them and being a learning point for them, one of those bits that holds in the back of their head that they can recall and go, oh, I'm not doing that again, it matters. And that's with young children or older children. It doesn't matter the age, those moments happen. And you have to reinforce that in your practice daily.
You mentioned really there the importance of relationships with all the stakeholders, you know, the teaching community, the children, and the parents as well. Then, what would your kind of 2 top tips be then for schools supporting parents from a safeguarding perspective whilst online?
Yeah, that's a big one. You know, like a lot of schools we've just been thrown into being like this, and we may all be at different stages of how we've developed that culture or that link or that awareness. I think one of the key things is about knowledge without blame. You know, often knowledge is used as a power tool, and just because you know how to use filters, or you know the rules about social media networks or sites or so on and so forth, it shouldn't be in a way that makes someone else feel less empowered. And actually we should use our knowledge to empower one another. So that is where a gap can quite often form with your community in terms of how you engage with them. And it needs to come from a point of connectedness and purpose. So basically, in an essence, it's like just a simple thing like saying, okay, having your kit being used in a public space. To many people, that doesn't sound like news, but it's worth reinforcing and reminding without saying it in a way that's derogatory or everyone knows this or whatever. It's just reinforcing a key message. And so I think one of the key things is to make sure that there are sort of top messages we have to keep checking in on, keep going back to. And that's like when you start your live conference, you know, little things like I say to my teachers quite often, just check with the kids where they are, you know, before you start talking and start the lesson off, or you start your conference. Where are you? Where are you sitting, Hamdan? Oh yeah, I'm in my bedroom in pajamas. Yeah, well, Hamdan, we're not ready then, are we? Go away, come back, see you in 5 minutes. You know, and it's that kind of thing. And then it's a conversation with the mum afterwards just to say, don't forget, we don't do that when we're working online, you know? And so it's the softly and the formal side. The formal side is very straightforward. You know, there's a bunch of resources out there all over the place with, you know, homeschool agreements, you know, kids signing up to internet safety, all of those kinds of things. But what we're talking about really is about habits. And we're trying to create good habits outside of our classrooms. And you need that partnership with the parents to do that. So it has to be a hand in hand and a conversation and a reminder and a safety net for them to say, we're working together on this, we're finding our feet together. So simple things that we all would have subscribed to, I think it's well worth reminding about on a regular basis. And that as practitioners, we reinforce those in the way that we work, so that those parents can see those behaviours and those habits being formed on our part and in our obligation. I think the other thing is to signpost parents regularly. You know, I'm not very technical. You know, before the show, I was having to download Google Chrome on my Mac, and I was panicking because it might have happened in time or whatever. I'm not a technical person. I love tech, but it doesn't make me technically good at it. And it's something I have to get my head around. And I bear that in mind when I'm working with parents. You know, it's not easy. So things like how do we set filters on our internet? You know, how do we do that? And those kinds of things I think are well worth in mind, just sort of taking a very gentle approach. We'll take you through it. We'll make a little video with it. We'll do it alongside you. Those things can be really helpful as well with parents. We did a lot of conferencing alongside parents in the early weeks to help them do it with us. So we would literally get alongside, we'd email them a link, they'd press on a link and they'd be on Teams with us, and then we'd show them how to do certain things. And I think that goes a long way, as opposed to just sending out a newsletter with a link on it to say, look at CEOP's website, they'll tell you how to do this or whatever. I think the more that you can be alongside and show that you're doing it together, that helps. So there's not like a golden, silver bullet for me, or golden arrow or anything like that. I think it's about common sense, about sharing practice and keeping messages alive. Simple things for me, really about routines, about screen time, about taking regular breaks, about working in a public environment. And about that goes back to that relationship with your parent and child as well, in that it's trying to have an open relationship. Especially kids get very protective of their kit. They get very protective about what they're looking on YouTube or on online, or how they're playing on Roblox or whatever they're doing. And if you start interfering with that and feeling like you're a threat to them, that's where you create that front with parent-child, and then it all closes down and can go wrong quite quickly. But if you can get alongside and maybe play a game of Roblox with them, or maybe have a look at what they're looking at on YouTube alongside them, they'll let you into that world. And then that way there's a trust building, and then you've got a door in to see when it's not right and to see where it is going. And I think routines as well, that kind of, we use it at certain times for certain things. We don't have it at the dinner table. You don't have it at a certain time. You don't have it in your bedroom at night time in bed or whatever. It goes on charge, and those kinds of things. Those are big tips for me. Just that as when I was a kid and before this stuff came in, and I was really happy just to play Atari once in a while. Things like being told that you had a story at bedtime and you had a bedtime routine and stuff like that were really good advice that still holds good today. Well, we just have to create those habits with the way we use kit today and the way that we have an online presence today into our routine. And it's just those kinds of things, and just helping people to see what others are doing.
Yeah, some great advice there, Alan. Thank you ever so much for sharing those things. I'm mindful, Ollie, we're already almost halfway through the show. So I just want to say thank you to Alan. What those adages that you were sharing there, it goes back to what we've all been saying so far tonight about those things, about values and relationships and routines. And children respond so well to routines, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And they like that. They like boundaries. They like to push against them. Of course they do. And that's part of growing up. And that's part of that. Where do I fit in the world? But it's really important. And if we can do that in our digital ways as well as our day-to-day routines with eating, sleeping, and so on and so forth, I'm sure we'll add value to our kids' lives.
Thank you ever so much. Cheers, Alan. We need to now bring in our next guest. Ollie, do you want to introduce our next guest?
Yeah, sure. So I'd like to welcome Barry to the show. He's at Safety UAE. Barry, tell us a bit about what you do within the UAE, please.
Sure. Yeah. No. Thank you very much for having me on. Pleasure to be here. I run an initiative called Beat the Cyberbully, and we've been I've been here in the UAE for the last 15 years, and we started doing Beat the Cyberbully back in 2014, and it was set up as a way to support the schools in a way around this area of cyber safety, cyberbullying prevention, online reputation management, social engineering, all these things that people are hearing about now, even more so than they were sort of 6 years ago, because we realized that there was a huge gap, as there tends to be, in terms of the level of understanding of our children. And they get the technology, they know how to use it very quickly, but they're not thinking about the impact of some of the things that they're doing. And then mum and dad, who, like myself, as a dad of young kids, are quite far behind when it comes to the technology, the usage of the technology, and perhaps more importantly, the dangers that presented to young people on those technologies. And because we're so far behind, we can't be the resource they need us to be. And so that's where Beat the Cyberbully came in, effectively to be that third party, backing up what's being said and being done within the curriculum from the student perspective. But over the last couple of years, we've really shifted our focus to mum and dad, because they've been the ones with the most questions when we do our sessions at schools. And as we've realized, they're the ones that have got the most catching up to do. So our initiative is to help to, much in line, with Alan was saying there, to help them hold their hand a little bit, and get them to a point, and I'm going to say it as well, but this knowledge without blame, I wrote it down, and so Al had posted it up there as well, to share the knowledge that I have. And that knowledge has come from my day job is running a digital marketing agency. So I spend all day, every day online helping businesses to use the internet more effectively. And Beat the Cyberbully came out of the fact that when I take away titles like marketing manager and general manager and marketing director. He left with mum and dad, and I started getting more questions from mum and dad in my professional meetings about, well, if that's how YouTube works, does that mean that my 8-year-old can see that? And I was like, well, yeah. Oh, how do I stop that then? And we went down that road, and so very quickly identified that there was a gap in the market, because something else I think that schools really are trying hard to do is to support the parents, but school isn't for parents. School is for the children. But we need mum and dad on board to help foster this community, to foster this safe space, so that we can all use this tool. And it's a brilliant tool. You know, us doing this is fantastic. It's great. We're in different countries, but we can use these technologies and these platforms for such positive things. And yet somewhere along the lines, the messaging has been lost, and our young people are using it to do things like bully each other, send inappropriate content to each other, and far worse things where we're seeing some really tragic results of what's happening in the digital space. And so part of what we do and why I do it is because I can't sleep well at night in a world where young people are getting to the point of thinking there's only one option for them, and they're 12 and 13 years old, and you think that's not right. That can't be the case. There's got to be something and somebody, i.e. mum and dad, teachers, counselors, supporting staff, that can step in and say something, even if it's just, are you all right? And sometimes we're really, really busy and we can't do that, or we forget to do that. And I could try and reminder to really up our own understanding of what's going on in the digital space as parents, and then apply that to our children and our children's friends and so forth, to try and help get everyone onto the same page. Because if we're all talking the same language, literally, when it comes to what is possible online and what, you know, we don't live in a world of rainbows and unicorns. There's people that use this tool for negative, and they're targeting, looking for opportunities. And sometimes our young people are literally putting their hand up and saying, hey, look at me, putting all of this content out there, not thinking about who can see it, sharing information. And mum and dad are maybe not even aware that they're doing this. And that's where we see this big gap that needs to be reduced, so that we can start to stop some of the really tragic scenarios unfolding.
That's really interesting, Barry. Thank you. It's interesting hearing your background, sort of professionally, linking your day job and things. Lockdown, coronavirus has brought. I mean, Twitter was always full of teachers sharing, connecting, and I mean, it's how I first came into contact with Olly. We've been close friends for quite a few years now. Particularly in lockdown, I've seen a huge swathe of teachers joining Twitter, looking to get ideas, connect, stay connected, learn more, because they're trying to develop their professional learning with using these tools and things. There are hashtags like Tiny Voice Tuesday and things like this. The teachers are jumping onto Twitter an awful lot right now. But so, what advice would you give to people who are new to social media? Alan says what advice would you give to those sorts of people who are new to the platform?
It's a great question, actually, because it's something that I do a lot of training of people outside of the education realm as well. And it's all around something that's also been mentioned earlier, which is manners and ethos and your approach to doing things. So for some reason, when we get behind a keyboard or behind our phone, we lose perspective and we start doing things that we would never do in real life, face to face. And I think the same thing applies on Twitter or LinkedIn or whichever platform that you're on looking for help. My top tip would be to give value first. It doesn't matter if you're a new educator or if you're new in the job or you think you don't really know anything. You do. You know quite a lot. And if you approach people to give value first, it's amazing how much then comes back towards you without you even having to ask. But for some reason, we get really stuck. Oh, I'm busy, I've got to do this, I've got to do this. And we just sort of put it out there with almost like our hand out all of the time saying, can you help me, can you help me, can you help me? Whereas if we approach it with can I add value to you first? And then people say, well, that was pretty good, actually. That's a really good idea. I'll use that. And then without you even having to ask, they say, so what can I do for you? And so, actually, I would really like some help or input on this particular lesson plan or this particular topic that I'm trying to get something created. And that transaction then happens so much easier. But I see it, I'm pretty sure anybody listening, and you guys will know this, on LinkedIn, it happens all the time where people approach you to connect with you and they don't try to build a relationship with you. They don't try to add any value to you. They send you a message. They don't personalize the message, and then you go through your list of things that you say, okay, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. I'll connect with them, and then the first message you get through is a sales message from them. You think, oh, I knew it. I knew I shouldn't have done that. Whereas if that contact has come to you and said, hey, Barry, noticed this is what you're doing, and I've got some common interests, and would you be interested in this paper, or of communicating or getting together and collaborating on something? Like, yeah, that sounds great. And then, of course, in the course of that conversation, I'm going to feel much more comfortable answering their questions or giving them the content that they wanted from me in the first place. And it's this idea of givers gain, give before you ask, and it'll come back in folds. And so that's the biggest piece of advice I'd give on Twitter, on LinkedIn, or wherever you are that you're looking for help. Because at the end of the day, why everyone goes online is for answers to questions. That's why we use the internet, to find answers. And if we can add value somehow to those people that are creating content to answer those questions, we can start to build relationships. And we can, sounds really utopian and whatnot, but it's such a negative place online because so many people are publishing so much negative stuff, is that if we start to take a more proactive, positive approach, maybe we can start to shift the algorithms to stop showing us so much of the negative stuff, which we get dragged into and comment. And of course, then the algorithm says, oh, I guess you like that. Let's show them some more of that stuff. And then we go down the rabbit hole. And it's so easy to do for us as adults. And then you apply that to a teenage brain, and we can see why we end up in quite a number of the situations that we do.
It's great to hear you talk there, Barry, about the importance of that symbiotic relationship between educators, and there's reminds me of what Alan has said about making sure, and yourself actually, about making sure that all the stakeholders in a school we're reading off the same hymn sheet, and everyone is aligned to that same guiding principle about being safe online and having everyone's best interests at heart. From a kind of whole school point of view, then, what are the key elements of a safe digital school ecosystem?
So it's a good question, and I think it goes back to this idea that in order to have a safe digital ecosystem, we need buy-in from everywhere. That in terms of parents, in terms of teachers, in terms of staff, in terms of everybody, so that we can get to that point where we're all singing from the same hymn sheet, as it were. Because whatever technology we choose, there's going to be training on that needs to be in place. There's a lot of variables that need to be in place for the actual technology that we're going to use. But for me, it's more around the mindset of the school, the senior management of the school, and then of course of the teachers, and then how they can then convey that message to the students and pupils, because that is going to foster the community where we can actually have open communication channels. And I think that's the key to successful, safer digital ecosystem, is open communication systems with a two-way flow of traffic, where we as parents, as teachers, as educators, as senior leaders are aware that we don't know everything, and that we can learn from it coming the other way. And then often, I do all the time, I deliver these sessions to students, and afterwards I get questions where I'm thinking, how on earth do you know about that? And I go off and research it, and I've learned something. And sometimes we forget that it is a two-way street. Yeah. Social media is and should be a two-way street. And therefore, when we're thinking about our ecosystem within our school, and rather than school, I would also use the word, as Alan said, as community, is that if we have a two-way communication channel, and there isn't judgment, and there isn't finger pointing of, well, it's your responsibility as the school because it happened on school, and well, no, it happened at the weekend. So if we stop doing that and wasting time doing that, because whilst we're doing that and trying to figure out who's to blame, who's still suffering, the child or children, and if we can start to say, well, it is our collective responsibility, that means me as a dad, I need to increase my level of understanding of this digital world, because it's not going away. It's not going back to how it was when I was younger, and we're not going back to that. We need to embrace this. We need to embrace the technology and understand that in order for us to be the resources our children need, we need to prepare them for the world ahead of them, which is a digital one. There's no getting away from that. And I think that if nothing else, coronavirus has really hammered that home, that it's amazing how much can happen online positively, and how the technology can have a massive positive impact, and how young people are adapting to it. And this is a key message as well, is that they are flexible and adaptable. And if we can help to mold the processes and how to utilize these, then they can get massive benefit out of that. But that requires buy-in. And I think that's the key variable out of all of this, aside from the technologies and platforms, is the buy-in from everybody. And I know that that's not necessarily realistic because a lot of the schools that I've worked with, they're doing everything right, and then the hurdle that comes at them is parents saying we're schools saying we want to implement this to protect your child, and the parents are going to say no, we don't want that because that's an invasion of privacy. You think, okay, hang on, and these are the kind of conversations that are going around. And I'm thinking we're spinning our wheels here. And we're not moving forwards, and that's because we're not on the same page, i.e. somebody doesn't understand what they're asking, or somebody doesn't understand what's being asked of them, and it's a knowledge gap. And so if we can then provide that knowledge without blame, we can maybe reduce that gap and we can start to move forward. And so this is the short answer, and I turned it into a long one there. The short answer: open communication and buy-in from everybody.
Thank you, Barry. One of the sort of next questions as well was really talking about the whole, you clearly work with a lot of parents and children and schools. You've alluded to some great points there. The next question, which you already know the question, but the next question is, what are the hallmarks of what a good looks like? You alluded to a few of the points there already. Are there any other sort of hallmarks of what a great one would look like in terms of schools that they could then take away as part of their sort of, they're reflecting on their practice or their policies or their strategies at the moment? Are there any other hallmarks schools should be striving to try and achieve? I think that rather than hallmarks, it's their approaches. And I think that the schools that are having the most success is what they're doing. The only way that I can really explain is that they have removed their ego from the equation, whereby they're not viewing themselves as we know everything that is right for this. They've removed their ego and are able to accept suggestions, criticism to a certain extent, constructive criticism, to be able to then take, because what that is live data, and they're taking live data from parents, from students, and then reiterating it into their policies and strategy on the fly. And that's also part of the whole digital aspect, is that it's real time, and we have the advantage now of getting real time data coming from our students, from our children, from our staff, from our parents. Some schools are choosing to silo it, and we'll get to it later. Other schools, and these are the ones that I'm working with that seem to see a positive impact, are taking that data and actioning it immediately and building it into the assemblies tomorrow, as it were, and changing their strategies and adapting their policies to something that's happened literally 24 hours ago. And that's where I see the most success happening, because we can't, and this is so true for digital, throughout, is that you can't put a policy in place and say, right, in the drawer, it's done. It's a fluid thing that's constantly changing, because the technology changes, how our children decide to use a specific platform changes, and we haven't thought about that because only a teenage mind could think using technology that way. But as soon as we find out about that, we have to then adapt that into our approach to education, awareness, most of all. And so when I say they've taken their ego out of it, they've also looked to third-party organizations or initiatives like ourselves, and what we do is come in and echo a lot of what's being said. But because we're not the school, and we're not a parent of necessarily a child, and we're not a counselor or so forth within the school, that we see a higher response rate in terms of eyes open, ears alert, and sort of shifty sideways glances at each other when we say certain things in our sessions, where they're starting to realize, oh, that's me that he's talking about, and that I understand the repercussions of my actions. Maybe I will do something slightly different. And that's the biggest reward we get when we do Live Schools, is students coming up to us afterwards and saying, I didn't realize, I never really thought about it like that. Thank you very much. I'm going to change a few things. And I think that's those schools that are allowing third parties to come in and do that, because we just have a different viewpoint as well. My knowledge and expertise comes from the last 10 years working in the digital industry. And again, not to take anything away from the teachers and whatnot, it's just a different viewpoint with a different knowledge that I can tie into stories and so forth to help young people, and now more so parents,
sort of process it all and go, oh, okay, well, I guess this is something that I really should be paying attention to. And that's the key. It is for students, young and old, and for mum and dad. We've got no choice but to start paying attention to it in much more detail than some people currently are.
It's interesting that you sort of have a similar sort of way of talking about this as Alan had, about relationships and values and all these sort of things. Thank you so much for those tips in there, Barry. I'm mindful of the time again. It'd be interesting, I think, to bring in our next guest at this point, Alan Mackenzie. He's a safety advisor on Twitter. Alan, this isn't on your sort of like list of questions, but we're really talking about here a lot to do with relationships, values, moral purpose, losing your ego, being in school. What are your thoughts on this sort of thing?
I think everything that's been said so far is absolutely spot on. It really is, and it's good for I'm just been sat here in the background, and some of the points that have been raised have allowed me to reflect on what I'm actually doing in schools, which is superb, because it's always a learning experience. The things that we do aren't always right; they're just in accordance with the experience we've had so far. I think what's very comforting for me to hear are certain aspects of this. For example, there's been relatively little mention of the technology so far, but massive mentions in regards to behaviour, and that is just so good to hear that, because I don't know what it's like for all of you, but for me personally, I'm still battling the technology argument first, especially in schools and especially with parents as well. It's the fear of the technology or not knowing about the technology, and the first piece of advice I always give out to everybody is take away the technology. It's almost irrelevant in most cases. What we're talking about is behavior and the ethos of that behavior, kind behavior, and all of these things that you've already spoken about as part of this. So for me, it's already very comforting to hear what everybody's said so far.
Brilliant, thank you, Alan. Alan Cocker sort of touched on this in the things he was sharing as well about people sort of being more comfortable to say things online than they might otherwise be face to face and things. It was you actually who first introduced me to the term online disinhibition. Can you share a bit around that and what that sort of means to you and all those sort of things, and some of those interesting terms that you've shared with me before? I think that's hypochondria, and I'll open it up to Barry and to Alan Cocker in a moment. But I'd like to hear from you on that first, if I could, Alan, please.
Yeah, I think I think Barry and Alan have already explained online disinhibition very, very well. All I'm going to do is apply the terminology to it. Online disinhibition is, I find it a fascinating area personally. And what we're essentially talking about here is behavior, and behavior is psychology. And a psychologist in 2002 called Professor John Suler from the United States coined the term online disinhibition. And it's a massive area. It's huge. And just to indicate how huge it is, he even wrote a book called Humans Become Electric. And that is all about online disinhibition. So you can already see what a big area it is. But essentially, if you're looking at online disinhibition, it's essentially a lack of judgment or a lack of restraint when communicating online. That's simplistically what it's all about. And there are two basic areas of online disinhibition which are benign or toxic. So benign might be something like, an individual might be more comfortable to share feelings or personal information or whatever it is without having that physical contact or that eye contact with a person in front. In other words, just being sat behind a screen. The toxic is the other end of the spectrum, and you've already alluded to this this evening already. And it might be things like vile comments or inappropriate behaviour, illegal behaviour, or such like. And I personally, the way I describe it is, it's basically a failure of the brain to risk assess a particular circumstance because you don't have that physical eye contact with a person. And where the brain is failing to risk assess properly essentially comes down to 8 areas in online disinhibition, but by far the 3 most common that we find, whether it's with children, young people, or adults, are dissociative anonymity, invisibility, or perceived privacy. In other words, you don't know me, you can't see me, and everything I say online is private anyway. So that is basically where the brain is failing to make a proper risk assessment. In other words, not engaging brain before mouth, because the brain will make a risk assessment on what you're saying milliseconds before you actually say it. But if you can't physically see that person, if you can't see their reaction, their eye movements, their frown, their smile, the brain can't properly make that risk assessment. And that's probably the best and easiest way of describing online disinhibition. And it's not an excuse for behaviors. It is just one reason of many, many reasons why there are particular behaviors online, and not necessarily online. Disinhibition happens all over the place. It's not necessarily online. I mean, a good example for would be, the psychiatrist's chair, for example. The psychiatrist, when you look at the films and TV series, sits behind the client who is lying down on a couch. That's because the client cannot see the person and therefore may open up more about what it is that they're experiencing and feeling. So disinhibition goes into lots of areas. But I personally find it fascinating, areas such as online disinhibition, because what it shows to us is how little we actually know so far. When we come to areas such as online safety and other areas that surround that, we're still in infant school in regards to our understanding of these behaviours and why these behaviours are online, are happening online. But at the same time, I do also think that schools are doing an incredibly good job, given how little we know. We're learning more every single day. We're learning more and more about it. And so these are the sorts of areas that we have to keep up with, understanding people's behaviours, why they're happening, reflecting on that, and then passing that knowledge and experience on to the students and the parents. But I always talk to older students about online disinhibition, because they should know the reasons why things are happening as well. It's not just a case of giving them an assembly and talking about a particular risk, because that has no positive impact whatsoever. But if you give them the knowledge as to why things are happening, then hopefully that gives them the knowledge to then critically think for themselves. So hopefully that answers your question.
That's a great response there, Alan. Thank you. I feel like it's one of those things that you're aware of, but you don't know, like you said, the correct terminology behind it. And it's those sort of characteristic behaviours that you might have dealt with almost on a daily basis in some way, shape, or form, whether that's our own behaviours online or dealing with children in school. On the kind of strand of sharing knowledge and then being able to partake it with the students in our school and the rest of the school community, what resources can teachers turn to if they want to become more skilled in this particular area around online safety? And are there any courses or qualifications that you could recommend?
Qualifications, no. There's no such thing as an online safety qualification. There just isn't, unfortunately. Probably the greatest tip, two tips, probably the best ones I can give to you. First of all, learn from the children. That's got to be first and foremost. It's not about speaking at the students, it's speaking with the students. And I think it's so important to do that, because the vast majority of my experience actually comes from talking to the children and the young people, and allowing them a non-judgmental space to talk and give their opinions back as well. And I think it's so important that they're allowed to be able to open up and give their opinions. So from that perspective, that's important. And then the other reason for that is that you've got to be speaking to them in their language as well. The language of a 16-year-old is very, very different to a language of an 8-year-old. Their online activities aren't that much different, believe it or not. When you look at the umbrella areas of their activities, they only come down to 3 activities: gaming, YouTube, and social media. And it's not difficult to actually understand those sorts of things. So if you're speaking to students in their language, they then feel more positive about what it is that you're talking about. They may feel more positive to open up. And if that's a non-judgmental talk, you start getting a lot of information from them. And that's where I get most of my information from, is the actual students themselves. The other one I would say is, of course, Twitter. I don't, Mark, interesting that you said you spent a lot more time on Twitter during this lockdown period. I'm completely opposite. I've spent a lot less time on Twitter during this period, because for me, it just seems Twitter is always full of noise. It really is a very noisy environment, and the noise seems to have gone up exponentially during this lockdown. However, what I would say is Twitter is a great area to connect with other professionals. And the advice I would give is, if you are just starting on this journey, select a number of individuals or organizations, 10 to 20, for example, people that you trust, or you've had you've been signposted to by somebody else, and just create an online safety Twitter list that you can just dip in and out of, every couple of days or whatever. Create a list of trusted sources. And by trusted sources, I most definitely do not mean the media at all, because they are so far removed as a trusted resource. I'm talking about academics here. Academics in regards to what sort of research is going on out there, what new things are we learning. Look at connecting with other educationalists as well. People who are frontline, are working in these particular. Look at connecting with psychologists, and learn more about behavior, why a particular behavior is happening online. In regards to courses and qualifications, qualifications, it's something that has been spoken about a lot in the past, and there is still talk going on about it, some sort of, accredited qualification. But the area of online safety is now so vast. It is just huge. It's impossible, to come up with some sort of a qualification. What I personally do is I connect with other like-minded individuals. I'm a part of an association called the Association of Adult and Child Online Safety Specialists. And what we do is we upskill each other. So each of those specialists have got their own areas of expertise. Somebody might be an expert in trauma, cyber trauma. Another person might be an expert in child sexual exploitation and abuse. And we come together regularly. At the moment, we're coming together weekly, and we are upskilling each other in certain areas, because they are my trusted resources out there. So learn from the students and learn from professionals and educators using social media, not just Twitter, all sorts of other social media out there as well. And they are the people that, if there are any good courses and such like that are coming out, that's where you'll get to hear about them from.
I'll jump in a second, if that's all right, Ollie, because something you neglected to share in with all of that, Alan, and please do join and share if you've got something similar, Barry. Alan compiles a magazine. Al Kingsley, our guest from last week, shared it earlier, actually. But Alan compiles together a free magazine called Ditto. And I'm sure, Alan, after the show, if you could reply in the comments of the video on YouTube with a link to where people could find that, I'm sure it'd be really helpful. But it's a resource that I learned so much from. And it's interesting how you were sharing a moment ago about signal versus noise on Twitter. And I was going to say to you, so, can you offer advice to sort of turn it from noise to signal? But you've done that really expertly with the lists as well. So thank you so much for that. Ollie, you were going to jump in again there. Sorry.
No, it's fine. I just wanted to, I was just thinking in the back of my mind there that obviously we're in the position that we are now. And I feel like, from all three of our guests, we've had such great advice for all schools that if they don't already have a digital strategy or a strategy for using technology for learning purposes within schools, I think that what Alan and Barry have shared is massively important for moving forward, and in terms of starting to write that strategy or adapting that strategy and making sure that it is fluid and includes all the stakeholders, and you do seek advice from other parties, not just maintain yourself in your silo in your schools, as well as being open with your entire school community. So it's great advice, I think, there from our guests this evening. I feel like I've learned loads, which is brilliant. That's the nature and purpose of our show. So thank you, everybody. I'm mindful of the time now as well, Mark, that we're
we're on the hour.
Yeah.
Did anybody have any more? We haven't had any comments, sort of questions from the audience, or some might sort of pop through now that I'm mentioning it. But were there any other comments? Did you want to feed into anything that Alan was saying at all, Barry, Alan?
Yeah, just a couple of things really struck with me, Alan. Really helpful for me. I'm learning tonight as well, which is just wonderful. But I really think the point you were making about getting alongside the students, and also the change about the behaviours, because it is about them recognising and then being able to connect with them, being able to say, I'm not going to be able to do that again. And the technology changes so quickly and so vastly that we can't have policies that are written to technology. Then the technology would never keep up with it. So we do have to have it in terms of it's about how we think and how we act. And that whole point about we're wired to take in our world around us and to assess risk, that fight or flight or that rational frontal lobe kicking in. And we have to engage this part by making sure that we put in some other behaviours that make sure that's engaged before they then go off and say there's no risk here. And that's so important. So and that can only happen by experience of getting alongside. So for me, that's made me think a lot about how do we do that in our schools? How do we get alongside our kids regularly and reinforce that?
Absolutely, you're spot on there with that, Al. And what I would say is that the way I deliver it in schools, in school, let's take primary, for example. In my lessons in a primary school, I talk about 3 areas only. I talk about gaming, I talk about YouTube, and I talk about social media. And there are a number of reasons I do that, but specifically the reason I do it is because, first of all, if you're talking about those areas, you've already got the kids talking, because they recognize them, they're in them, they're on there, they know what's going on. But also is that if you are talking about those areas and giving examples of the things that are happening within those spaces, it's going to have a more positive impact because they recognize it. And so, for example, if you're looking at behavioral issues such as the classic one, which is falling out on WhatsApp, WhatsApp groups, the classic falling out with year sixes, it's an ideal one. Well, you can use a conversation as a learning experience. You can use real world examples and you can make them up. There are plenty of WhatsApp, Snapchat and Instagram, chat generators out there where you can make up a conversation or an image or whatever it is and use those as a learning examples. And I've had so many times, and it's got nothing to do with me, but I've had so many times where children have spoken to me afterwards or caught up with me in the playground as I'm leaving school and said, can we have another e-safety lesson, Mr. Mack? Because we enjoyed that so much. And the thing for me is, if they enjoyed it, the impact is there. It's a positive impact. I always approach the lessons from a positive aspect, not from a negative risk aspect. And for me, that's the way that the children will take it away. And hopefully, if we keep chipping away at it, eventually we start to change those behaviours from negative to positive. That's always the biggest one for me.
Really powerful.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything that's been said there, because we do the same thing. We use a little bit of the shock and awe negativity to grab their attention and then flip it and focus on the positive use of this technology and what they can do with it. And my tagline is always that they can design the life they want to lead. They can do literally anything they want by leveraging this technology from a positive perspective. And if they put as much effort into that as they are to sending nudes and bullying each other, that they're going to go a long, long way. And it's just about, I think it's very key. This is the same in the business stuff I do. It's about talking the language of your customer. and in this case, our customer is the children and the parents. And we have to adapt our language when talking to those because of the level of understanding in each of those. So talking the language of our customer is so important, and making it relevant to them. And that's something I'm also very wary of, is that I have to remember that I'm not as young as I think I am. And so if I start trying to talk like a 16-year-old, they very quickly look and go, stop. But yeah, exactly. But if we can help put it into perspective for them and then offer that experience of what's going on and how their actions on those platforms and those channels could potentially impact them, with examples of how it has also impacted other young people of the same ilk, that's when we see the biggest breakthroughs.
Absolutely, and always being mindful and very careful, as we all know, of victim blaming. It can be very, very easy to go down the victim blaming route, and I've seen it on numerous occasions where you'll use an example, say for example, a young girl there's been an attempt exploitation going on, and you get the question, what did she do wrong? She did nothing wrong. She's been exploited by a very convincing criminal out there. So we've got to be very, very careful around that victim blaming and judgment.
Definitely.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you so much, gentlemen. I'll just reinforce this message just come in from Wayne Denner, actually. It's been a fantastic conversation this evening. I've learned so much, and it's great to have perspectives from so many different areas, both within school and specialists who work with people like yourself, Alan, and your background as well, working with people outside of education, but using that from the mums and dads side of bring things in as well. Barry, thank you so much to all of you for taking the time to join us this evening. Ollie and I are just going to start wrapping things up a little bit now, so we'll remove you from the chat and things, but please do hang around in the lobby, the virtual lobby. We can catch up for a bit of chinwag afterwards. Thank you so much for giving up your time this evening to share with all the viewers and things. I say Wayne Denner's comment, I've had private comments to me directly from people saying they're watching, saying they really enjoyed it as well. So thank you so much for all of your sharing this evening. Ollie.
Yeah, I think I echo that as well. And just as a final thought, sort of stringing all your words together is, it's more important now than ever that we mirror the positive behaviours within our school community that we wish to see. So I think now would be a good point to wrap the show up and let everybody know what the conversation is going to revolve around next week, I think. Yeah, brilliant stuff. I'll just take you out and say thank you very much, Barry. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Have a great evening.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Alan. And if I can find his window, there we go. Thank you, Alan. There we go. I'm loving this initiative, Ollie. These stories and the experiences and the learning opportunities that are here. I'm definitely not somebody who believes in having an echo chamber one bit, because it's important to have professional challenge. But it is lovely to be able to hear from people who in completely different circumstances, different situations, from Alan Cocker to Barry to Alan Mackenzie. Those consistent strands about morals and values and relationships and culture and all those different things. It's so powerful, and I think there's lots there for schools and teachers who are watching and leaders who are watching to actually reflect on, don't you?
Yeah, I do, and I think a lot of the things that our guests talked about, they're the cornerstone of a really good education, I think. And when you get things like that right in schools, revolving around culture and morals and making the right decisions, everything else follows on from that. So it's great to hear that advice from our guests and know through various different contexts that's what's at the heart of everything that we do within schools. Yeah. Well,
let's give everyone a quick through. I'm running over quite a bit. Big shout out to our guest next week. We're looking next week at how virtual reality and augmented reality transform education. We've got a real international flavour to our guests next week. Do you want to introduce our first guest for next week, Ollie?
Yeah, sure. So you can see on the image here, we've got well-known in the Middle East, Steve Banbury. He's multi-award winning educator, based in Dubai. He focuses on impactful integration of VR and AR in the classroom. He's an ADE, MIEE. He runs CPD inside virtual reality, and he blogs an awful lot and consults with schools in the region. So he's a really well-known educator out here. So really looking forward to hear what Steve has to say on that topic.
Yeah, me too. So Steve's someone I've known and worked with, and I'm sort of like yourself, Ollie. Please better call him a friend. So it's really great to be able to have him come along and share his experiences and all the things that he's got a wealth of experience to share with us. Our next guest is Mr. Erdogan Edu. He's a Hong Kong-based educator, as you can see from his photo there. He's an Apple Distinguished Educator. And whilst he uses Apple products a lot and augmented reality in his teaching and learning practice in the classroom, his area of expertise and outside of teaching is in film and media. And he actually uses a lot of the things that we learn from augmented and virtual reality to actually inform the projects and the activities and things that he does with his learners in the classroom. So I'm really, really, really excited to hear his perspectives, don't they, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's really useful, I think, to think about how not only you can apply to sort of teaching and learning activities, but also what we can learn from the technologies to think about how we can apply that to teaching our subjects as well. Our next guest, shall I try to do Arani as well?
I'll go for it. So Arani Logan, she's CEO and co-founder of Augmentify It. Along with Peapod City and Amazing STEM. Educators might be familiar with Augmentify It. They've the virtuality T-shirts and various other AR, VR products in schools. So really looking forward to hearing what Arani will bring to the conversation next week.
Yeah, I got some fantastic products with the AR cards, which have got quizzing built into them. Which is a lovely product. I've heard from her recently that they are augmentifying the Guinness Book of World Records and things with that. And say one of the most popular books signed out school libraries in the world ever, apparently, is like the Guinness Book of Records, right? So for them to be augmentifying the pages of that particular book, which refreshes all the time, doesn't it? Again, she's got a wealth of experience from a developer's side as well. So we're really excited to have Steve and Mr. Erdogan and Arani joining us on the show next week. As always, it'll be 8 p.m. GST for those of you in the United Arab Emirates, and for those of you who might be where I'm based, at a 5 p.m. start. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and it's good night from me.
It's good night from me.
Thank you ever so much. Cheers.